The first thing that we want to do, and this is sort of the lowest level thing, which is to, at the end of the day, we would like to have as representative a list of the verb roots in the language. Okay. Of course, this is due tomorrow night, so we have to be realistic, but do what you can. Okay. And especially if you're working in different groups, at the end of the day, we'll be able to collate what you've done, and so we'll have in the case for the people working on Hindi, there is already a list, and a number of you have told me that there's verbs in that list that you don't recognize, and that's okay. Some of those I also don't recognize, but they exist. So at some point what I did was, every time I would see a verb used somewhere, I would put it in there. Okay, so this is taken from texts, and in some cases taken from dictionaries. Okay, so one thing also you see is that the actual vocabulary that you use, so it may be that the Hindi list might look very long, but a lot of those verbs are very low frequency. In fact, a lot of those verbs are not even in, say, my active vocabulary. So, I mean, a related question is there, this is not for this project, but just to think about, English has this wonderful property, right, that you can verb pretty much up anything. You can take any noun and you can make a verb out of it, but that's because English has zero derivation. Okay. Hindi, for example, on the other hand, doesn't quite do that. Hindi has a very, very productive strategy. I mean, super productive strategy, which is to take some kind of a root and then combine it with kar or ho, and then you get a verb. So that's what Hindi does. But the direct strategy, not even zero derivation strategy, but the direct morphological verbalization strategy is kind of slow in Hindi. It's not the default way for making up new verbs, and that is why studying this is actually useful, because it's not an insanely large class. So let me give you an example of one word which has slowly, I think, might be becoming a verbal root. Derived but still verbal root. So the verb, this is in sort of more Sanskritic style Hindi, svikara. So I accept this, you can say I this, मैं ये स्वीकार करता हूँ, right? But there are people who can apparently say things like मैं ये स्वीकारता हूँ. Right. So I think it's at least possible to imagine that, but it depends whether your vocabulary has that or not. Okay. But for the most part, that is not the standard strategy for Hindi. Okay. So that's why we can actually talk about a more or less fixed set of verbal roots. Okay. So we first make a list of verbal roots. Now comes the exciting part, right? So what we want to do, so I've slightly changed it from what I told you yesterday. It's the same things, but I'm going to suggest a way of organizing things. So the idea is now, the first thing you will do is the case frame exercise. The other exercises will be under the case frame exercise. So what you will do is the first thing you will do is when you pick up a verb from your list of verbs, is you will ask yourself, what kind of case frame does it appear in? Okay. So, and when we say what kind of case frame, so let's look at some examples. So if you're doing Hindi Urdu, intransitive verbs will mostly fall under the frame DP nominative verb. Okay. And so again, to be simple, to keep things simple, let's say we test the verbs in the future, or maybe just a simple progressive or something like that, something so that we don't have to worry about ergativity right now, right? So intransitive verbs, I think in Hindi will be mostly or exceptionlessly DP nominative verb. Okay, so that's going to be point number one. Okay, so that's going to be our case frame number 1, let's say. Okay, DP nominative, right? Then you will have another case frame which will be DP nominative, DP, and now here there is already some analytic work happening. DP dom V, and DOM is a cover term, okay? It's not a case marker. It means a code that is optional. So, for example, the verb read, Ram ne kitab padhi, Ram ne kitab ko padha, this is DP nom, a DP dom V, right? On the other hand, the word bulana, as we discussed yesterday, will probably, it will be, I wouldn't put it directly under DP nom, DP dom V. Later on we might think about what to do with it, but that's because you can say Ram ne bachche ko bulaya, but I'm not sure you can say Ram ne bachcha bulaya, right? So if you cannot say that, it's not DOM, okay? We want to keep things relatively close to the ground here. We will do analysis once we are done with this exercise. So we want to keep things just at the level of can you do this, can you not do this, okay? So transitive verbs and ditransitive verbs will typically in Hindi will be DP nom, DP dative, DP dom V. If you don't feel comfortable with putting DP dom V there, you could even put DP accusative or DP whatever in that, okay? So these are the 3 basic default case frames. But these are not going to be the only case frames, okay? So then things start getting interesting. What other case frames will you need? So with the word dick, you're going to need a different case frame, which is going to be DP dative, DP nominative verb, okay? With the verb mill, you are going to actually need 2 case frames. So one of the case frames is what John met with Mary, Ram Sita se mila, okay? So that's the DP nom, DP instrumental verb. But there is another case frame here, okay, which is the DP dative, which is the dative subject. Ram ko sadak pe paise mile. So to Ram, something was found, right? So then the verb mill will go into 2 baskets. One will be the DP dative, DP nominative verb basket, and the other one will be the DP nominative, DP instrumental verb basket. Right? So and also, right, so we saw that for Mahajan and for some of you, the verb mill, even in its transitive, in its non-dative subject usage, Mahajan could say things like, he had these examples, right? Ram Mary ko mila, meaning Ram met Mary, which is completely impossible for me. I simply lack that case frame entirely, okay? But if you have that case frame, you should put it there, okay? So you will end up getting a number of case frames, and one interesting thing would be to see how many of these do you need in the language, right? Is it, in the end, I suspect it's not going to be a huge lot, okay? So we do this. Once we have this, then we want to do some other things, and for this, what we are going to talk about today is going to be relevant. So one of the things you might want to talk about is, if you get a verb, you might want to say, does it participate in a transitivity alternation? Okay. So for example, you pick up the verb open in Hindi, khol, and then you say, oh, khol has an intransitive, khul. So I want to write down that this participates in a transitivity alternation, but maybe, but when you are doing this, this is right now is very vague, participates in a transitivity alternation. It may be that your language has many transitivity alternations, okay? So maybe what you want to write, when you are doing this part, Separately, you will first have, these are the transitivity alternations that I'm interested in, and it participates in this transitivity alternation. Okay, so then you can subclassify the predicates in a particular case frame based on which transitivity alternation it participates in. Unfortunately, the format that I have in mind right now, ultimately, like if we had a nice database or something, what I'm suggesting will end up with a certain amount of redundancy. So what I mean is, when you get kul, you will say yes, participates in transitivity alternation, in this transitivity alternation. And when you get kol, you will again say yes, participates in a transitivity alternation. Ideally, we would just draw a line between, we would have something we could say these two words are related. Okay. But right now we'll just have to say participates in a transitivity alternation and then maybe give that. So when you give the transitivity alternation, you can give the pair there. Okay, so we know that. Another thing separate from the transitivity alternation, we will talk today a bit about indirect causatives, and you can indicate whether it has an indirect causative or not. Okay, and also you can indicate whether the particular verb allows for ergative subjects or not. So in order to test for ergative subjects, you would of course want to put it in the perfective, right? So these are the questions that come to mind for Hindi Urdu, but these are not the questions that are going to work for all the languages that you're looking at. So for example, if you're looking at Tamil or Malayalam or Bangla, this question goes out the window, right? There's not going to be any ergatives. So don't waste your time with that. If you're doing Nepali and you're doing this question will need to be changed, because in Nepali, everything allows for ergative subjects in principle, and it's not absolutely everything, but many more things allow for ergative subjects. So maybe you might want to modify this question into allows for, so one part of the question would be ergative subjects are obligatory in the perfective, right? So you put it in the perfective and ask, so what we seem to know for Nepali is that when you have perfective transitives, then ergative subjects are obligatory. In many other cases, ergative subjects are possible, but they're not obligatory. And then there's a third, I imagine that I don't know for sure, but it may be that there are some predicates that do not allow ergative subjects. So then you could notate that. But there would be, it wouldn't be as simple as allow for ergative subjects, don't allow for ergative subjects. So you want to modify that. And when you're talking about these two also, the participates in a transitivity alternation and has an indirect causative, this is really going to, you will need to determine what alternations you have, what kinds of indirect causatives you have, because they will again not be the same. Okay. So for example, as we discuss causatives today, it may be that your language, the language you're looking at, is not doing morphological causatives the way we are talking about right here. Maybe it's doing some kind of more syntactic causative. And then you'd want to see whether there are any restrictions on that. So this question could become focused on that. Okay. So the heart of the classification is going to be here. And once you've done that, then there will be subclassifications. Okay. So at the end of the day, we want to see how many clusters of verbs emerge, because the hypothesis is that well, if the case frames are identical, then at least certain aspects of the argument structure are going to be parallel, right? So if the case frames are identical, then of course we know that the number of arguments is identical, right? Otherwise, how could the case frames be identical? And not just that, I mean, the case, irrespective of whether you do the traditional style of case assignment or whether you do dependent case style case assignment, case is configurational, right? Case is a combination of configurational and lexical, and if two verbs have the same case frames, then that means they share at least that. Okay, so that's a good. So this basically gives you a sense of the structures involved. Okay, so this we'll circulate this. I've sent this to be printed, and then if you have any further questions, ask me during the lunch break, or during the work break. Okay, so now we can turn this off. We don't need projection anymore. And so I hope you all have the causative handout. So when you are doing this, I want you all to also look at one particular thing. I didn't write it down, but I meant to. Look at the ditransitive verbs in your language. Okay, look at them carefully. Look at how they are built up. Here's why I'm telling you to look at them. I have the suspicion that apart from the verb give, apart from a few verbs like they and lay, give and take. Okay, so take actually, by the way, is an interesting example. The case frame of take is going to be different from the case frame of give, right? Because Lena is DP nominative, DP instrumental, DP dom, right? Kamne Sita se kitab li. Okay, so there's Dena and then there's Lena. Okay, so these two are very nice monomorphemic, they, lay. Okay, but try to think of then there is send, bhejna. Okay, so there are these three which are small. But once you go beyond these, most of the ditransitives that you find in Hindi are actually derived. So John taught Mary physics. John ne Mary ko bhautiki padhai, right? So you get something that looks like a causativized predicate. Okay, John called Bill an idiot. John ne Bill ko idiot bulaya. Okay, or try out other. It's kind of shocking. Like once you start pushing it, how few underived ditransitives there are. In fact, at least in Hindi, what you realize is that the material that we are going to discuss today, the verbal roots are immensely connected. That it's not unlike in English where sometimes it just looks like you have different verbal roots for different things. You see a lot of evidence for morphological derivation between verb roots, between different kinds of verbs, right? If we distinguish them from the verb roots, okay? So pay a close attention at the ditransitive predicates in your language and see if they are related to predicates elsewhere. Okay, so so let's start. So in most Indo-Aryan languages, causatives are formed synthetically. So a synthetic passive just means that what you do is you take a verb root and you put a morpheme on that. And okay, so here is an example from Wallace from Nepali. In 1A you have gar chu, so the chu is just the inflectional ending. But in 1B you get this au, which is the causative morpheme on the do. Okay, so I do the work and I have the work done. Okay, so I imagine that this 1B is a little bit like, I'm guessing that what we're seeing in 1A and 1B, this is like karna and karwana, right? So this au is might be similar to the Hindi va. Okay. Now some Indo-Aryan languages also have periphrastic causatives. So Nepali is one. So and here we see this word that we have been running into, lag again. This verb lagna does a million things, and so it also does appears in this construction. I have the work done. So you have an infinitive, and then you have this verb lug, and there is a causative here, but it's on lug. It's not on the verb itself, and this is quite curious. Okay, so I have the work done, and now then you have this example from Gujarati. So you have this verb